haven't met Alex, she is a futurist. She's a global futurist. She does work with Foresight Education. I love this about you. You're a writer, you are the Foresight Director at Fast Future, and you are also a lecturer at the University of Houston. Alex, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Very happy to be here.
I am curious. You could bring so many different angles to this conversation of the transition from now into next. And our audience is entrepreneurs, it's small business owners, it's solopreneurs, and some folks who are finding themselves as solopreneurs for the first time in their lives. So I want to start this with a broader question. What are you thinking about, and what would you suggest that others be thinking about in this time to help them frame their strategy so they can then work toward tactics and results?
Yeah, okay, good question. That's a great question. I think that, is very on the pulse of what's going on. I think this is what people want to talk about. And I would say that I would echo a lot of what I heard you guys talking about in the last hour, which is this is the time to figure out what we want to create. Mm-hmm. And it's a very exciting time. I mean, obviously it's a very distressing moment, and whether the event was predictable or not, the outcomes are the thing that will surprise us more, I think, will surprise us most, right? The fact that there was a pandemic isn't a shock. I mean, it's a shock that when it happened, no one knew when it was going to happen, how it was going to go down. But what we know probably even less about is what the world could be like afterwards. So I guess my advice, my thinking here lately is around, taking stock of what we have already built and deciding what we liked about it, what still works, and what we would rather let go. It's an opportunity to do that kind of thing. I'm thinking about things like education. I mean, just to give you an example, in terms of public education, something that occurred, at least in my state, I think probably in all the states, but the state let go of the standardized testing requirements that public school students are expected to meet, right? There's these like statewide standardized tests that are mandatory. Grade promotion typically depends on it. Graduating depends on passing these types of exams. And because of the emergency situation and school being canceled and everything, those exams were allowed to, they let it go, right? Kids didn't take the test. They're waiving the requirement. They're waiving the state requirement for the exam. So I think that example is one that lets us, that shows how we get to evaluate what we thought was important, right? What has always been important. There have always been critics of standardized testing, but this time what brought it down this time, what prevented the test from being done was an event that we didn't really predict, right? And we just sort of had to roll with it, and we had to, okay, the tests are not that important. We're just going to let it go. But I think it's a chance to evaluate what other things do we have in our life, in our society, business, schooling, whatever, that we really, it's not really the life or death thing that we kind of thought it was before. Yeah. There was a time when, teachers have been fired, schools have been delegitimated, possibly defunded and closed, based around a lot of the standardized testing. And now that we can see that life can go on without it, it's kind of an interesting example of other possibilities that we could achieve.
It sounds to me like assumptions being rocked to the very core, the assumptions about how education worked. And even if your business is not in the education field, that same kind of thinking, that disruption around what felt like the truth and the way, the reality at that time, all of a sudden is no longer. And the question you're offering is, what now does this give us the opportunity to create, to shape, to build moving forward?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And with the schooling example, I would just add that we had previously placed so much, or the standardized testing, we previously placed so much weight on these tests, for example, that it could prevent a child from moving to the next grade, or cost a teacher their job, or cause, who knows, distress for a family or something, or weaken the community by closing a school that wasn't meeting those standardized expectations. That's, we really need to evaluate those sorts of things now and say, do we want to have such barriers to success as tests, for example, tests that have been criticized for many years as maybe not measuring what we think they measure.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just one example, I think, of how we can decide what worked, what was good about previous systems, put that into new systems, but make sure that we're making choices that we will like the outcomes from.
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have about thinking in futuristic kinds of spaces is that it's not relevant to today, or that it isn't, it's not born out of the moment that we are looking at right now. But really, I think a lot of it is about possibility, and what's the opportunity inside of the space that we're in right now. And again, this notion of questioning the assumptions that hold up, that were barriers to opportunity, and what happens when we remove them.
Right.
And you are shifting in your classes. I know that you are actively teaching right now, and although you're very familiar with the online world, you have also now shifted over into what used to be an in-person class online. You've had to shift your business model and your model of operating in the midst of all of this. How has that been? What have some of the challenges been? And where are you seeing a best practice or things that are working well to help others out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of people could gain a ton of wisdom by sharing these kinds of experiences, because we've all been asked to be more flexible and adaptable in this time, ranging from everything from these kind of Zoom calls to, getting our jobs done and doing our professional life. As I mentioned in another conversation, your pet or your child might decide to join you in the middle of a meeting, and these sort of formalities around business and education are sort of wearing down in this time period. The online factor, it's been around. So online education has been a trend for 20, 30 years now. It's kind of interesting to see something like online schooling that's been around for a while, kind of see it potentially reach that tipping point where maybe people decide this is how we like it. Now that we've been kind of forced into it by circumstances, maybe we should, really take it more seriously. Or maybe some people are starting to like it. I know some people are starting to dislike it. I have had that experience. And not me, but I have heard from some students this is not their preferred way, which I think was kind of surprising. These are young 20-year-old, Gen Z type students, and we assume they love everything digital. And I think that may be an assumption that we learn about in the course of how schooling ends up going. But in terms of being flexible and adaptable, again, just being ready to respond to the situation and do the best you can. At least at the university, I think that has been the approach of many instructors. Don't try to recreate what we had face to face, but understand that it's going to be something different. Make it appropriate and adequate for the situation, and understand that it's just not going to be the same semester that it would have been otherwise. So that's my advice to people. Be patient with yourself and lower your expectations. Not because we should have low expectations, but because this is not the time to hold yourself to a perfectionist level of outcomes.
It's probably not going to be perfect anyway. So in the absence of that.
Yeah. But I think everyone's doing a great job adjusting their lives. Those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to stay at home and work from home and not have to go out, I think most people are doing a really good job making it work one way or the other between childcare and homeschooling, or just, some people are all alone and not really interacting with others outside of the Zoom type format. And I think that's a huge adjustment. And I'm really proud of most people who are doing a great job at being adaptable for the benefit, for the greater good. That's really an important thing to recognize about all of us right now, and that we can keep doing that if we want to.
Yeah, the adaptability that we have is inherent in
Yeah.
all of us. This is a skill that we all have, and we can do this. Alex, I want to make sure there's a question here in the chat bar that is about in-person businesses. You made the reference to some folks can make the shift to work from home because of the nature of their work. It looks a little bit different. It might be a little kind of wonky, but it's there. We're from home. However, there are other kinds of businesses, like a hairdresser in this case, where that's not a possibility, or certainly not a possibility in the same way, shape, and form that it was prior to this. So what from the strategic, the frameworks that you use, as well as sort of shifting over into the tactical components, how should somebody who's faced with this challenge slash opportunity face it and think about it?
Well, I mean, again, I would choose to, I would encourage everyone to go with their adaptability and flexibility, that inherent creativity that I think everyone has, and we're being forced to use it now, being creative about our space at home and how to make this into an office and how to make it into a setting where, I can let people in and talk to them, for example. That's for those of us who are lucky enough to be at home. But the ones who have to do their job, I was actually reflecting on this earlier. As a futurist, obviously I study a ton of different trends and new ideas that pop up across a bunch of different areas. And one trend that's been sort of bubbling up the past couple of years, year or so, is something called a ghost kitchen or a cloud kitchen. Have you ever heard of this term?
Mm-hmm. No, yes, I've heard of it, but why don't you explain for the group?
So it's a food business, a restaurant business that doesn't have a physical location. It's sort of like the sharing economy incarnation of restaurants, right? So if I'm a chef and I want to sell my dishes, but I don't have the money for open my restaurant, I could lease the kitchen for a night or for a weekend or whatever from an established space. And there are some spaces opening just for this, right? Kind of the WeWork of kitchens, where you can go in as a chef and lease a space and sell your food via app, self-delivery. There's no customers coming in, it's just takeout delivery. So that trend has been sort of ongoing for a year or so, right? And it's kind of interesting to see in this pandemic response that sort of become the norm for restaurants. They've basically all been asked to become kind of a ghost kitchen. I mean, they all have their physical space, obviously, but I can see how that kind of thinking, that kind of elimination of the overhead and that, I don't know any other term for it, but like digital transformation of whatever it is that you do, figuring out how to turn it into an app basically and making that service available. You mentioned hairdressers, hairstylists. Maybe it becomes something where we, the consumer, don't really go to a centralized hair styling location, but they start coming to us at home on a one-on-one situation. I actually have a stylist friend who's from the Middle East, and she told me that that's actually how a lot of people do it there. So in America, that's not normal, but maybe we need to look around the world for other examples. How are these businesses conducted? How can I adopt one of those models and become viable that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially this interim time, because the moment of lockdown where you're not allowed to open your doors at all or do anything, there certainly are opportunities, like you can sell coloring kits, and a lot of people are selling online tutorials or going online or on Zoom with their clients to help them color their hair or cut their hair or whatever. And this interim times, I love this because we're shifting into the lockdowns around the world are beginning to open up. And so looking at global models where this is an experience that happens often in Brazil. That's a country that I've lived in for a while and have some experience there. So that's something that's more common there. Glam Squad is that company that will come to your house and do your makeup. But I love this. What if we move away from the assumption that we need to have that centralized location? Is that really, and all the overhead associated with it, and colleagues that we may or may not like to a certain degree, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what might be the opportunity inside of this? Yeah.
Sure.
So as you're seeing this moment unfold, and you have been working on predicting the future and helping shape what it will look like, provoking folks in the world around that. Were you expecting something like this to happen? And what of the things that you've been thinking about can we apply here and now?
So you mean the pandemic event? Yeah. I mean, I think that it's a wild card that's been talked about for a long time. You know, futurists have talked about a pandemic type event for some time, and while we do kind of forecast what might happen, we don't tend to think of ourselves as people who predict what's going to happen or even really when, right? There's really no good predictions out there being made by futurists that I'm aware of that said this is going to happen in 2020 or whatever. That just wasn't the case, but it's certainly been at the forefront of people's thinking. Personally, I had always been more fixated, I mean, in terms of like medical emergencies and stuff, on a different trend or issue that has been bubbling up for quite some time, which is the antibiotic resistance.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of that. That's been talked about for years, right? It's been very mainstream, how we need to find new antibiotics. The ones that we have aren't working. They could let superbugs emerge and develop. And so I'm surprised, I guess, just like everyone else, by the nature of the event, by the timing of the event. But I don't think, you know, there was any predicting that particular thing, this particular type. And I think what you said earlier really rings true with me about it's all about assumptions. It's all about challenging your assumptions. And I think the pandemic itself doesn't challenge our assumptions. Everyone knows a pandemic can happen, happens through history, it can happen anytime. But what's surprising is the aftermath. I think people are shocked by the aftermath, how poorly prepared, I guess, so many nations and governments seem to be to handle it well. I think that's more, to me, the wild card black swan outcome is, you know, especially in the United States, we sort of always thought we had this massive national defense build up there to protect us from something major, like even a nuclear attack or something. Yeah. And you know, I feel like those are the assumptions that have really been shattered this time, as far as like what a futurist can't predict, you know. I don't think anyone predicted that, you know, states would be working together in this concerted effort, in the failure, in the lack of leadership of the federal government, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and then now seeing this as the consequence, what are the, you know, looking at and examining what are the opportunities for fixing, for improving, and for ensuring that things that come next don't, you know, that we are better prepared in the face of that. There's another question that came in here. What are best practices? What are the best practices for online platforms that you're seeing out here in the universe? What are some of the best practices that you're seeing in the forums and platforms?
You know, I would love to hear what other people think about this. I'm starting to learn about Zoom. Zoom is cool. It's interesting. Teams.
Yeah.
Teams is what the school kids seem to be using around here. And as you know, I see that they have like this education aspect of Teams. At least ours seems to, the one the K-12 is using, where you can put like your assignments. So I was kind of surprised to see that Microsoft Teams has such a classroom type option there. And then Teams, and I would love to hear what other people think is working well. That's not the extent of my experience there.
On the list, yeah. So if others, please type in the other platforms that you're seeing used incredibly well. Zoom is, for me, it's a tool that I had been using prior to all of this. And it's great for, of course, the webinars, the conversations. It also has some structures on the back end for breakout rooms, and which give you the ability for people to do innovation sessions and then come together inside of that. Microsoft Teams also does the same, has the same kind of function. Google has a tool as well. And the fun challenge of all of this kind of thing, I think, is, I'm imagining that you find this also as an educator, it's how do you translate the experience of being in the classroom, not solely here are the 8 things that I'm presenting to you on my presentation, but how do you build a room of inclusiveness and conversation and engagement in that space?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I've been doing for a while, because fortunately I have taught online for a long time in addition to teaching face-to-face. So I've got both things going on. And what I've been doing for quite some time with my online students is audio recordings. I think video is really cool. And I think after this semester, I have a feeling after the whole university's now been in the online format, I don't know if I'm going to be expected to do video now. I feel like my audio, I might be asked to step it up a little from students who have now become accustomed to this. But I have done weekly audio recordings for my classes. I've done that for a while now, and I find it very effective because I do them in real time. I record them all fresh every semester. So it's like, hi, it's Monday. This is what we're doing this week. Here's what we did last. So it's sort of like the same stuff I would tell them if I make them in person. They're not extremely instructional. If sometimes I do make an instructional video recording, and that would be totally separate. But I do weekly recordings, which is just like, here's what you should have done last week. This was last week's topic. Here's what we did. Here's what we're doing this week. Here's what we're doing next week. And just like a check-in, and it's 5 or 10 minutes of me talking into my phone and then uploading that to my online learning platform or whatever. But I find it's very centering for students who are online, remote, to hear my voice every week, to hear that kind of check-in of what's going on. Don't forget these deadlines. This or that has changed. And then responding to questions that have come in. Like if 5 students emailed me that week saying, hey, what's going on with that PowerPoint? It looks weird or something. I can say, oh, I fixed the PowerPoint. Sorry, I had messed it up. Yeah. So I think that the audio, it's really easy. It's really quick because we have audio recording apps on our phones. And doing a video is a lot of pressure. You got to get the lighting and for me anyway, I've never been into doing video, but I think that the audio is really a nice touch. And so one every week, that way people just hear what's going on, they hear my voice. It's a connection. It's a one-way connection, but in the absence of being able to meet face to face, I think it's kind of a nice substitute.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful best practice to take as folks are either working with clients, as they're working with their own teams. This notion of how can you take the audio components and beyond that, all of this marvelous technology that's at our fingertips to connect with, to provide additional information. I've been participating in a project that's doing some disruption around online education in the corporate education space, and these micro bits of learning that are video, some of them audio, some of them reading, some of them interactive, animated visuals. And so combining these different kinds of media can really help connect and also stimulate the brain in a different sort of a way.
Definitely. Yeah.
So a lot of the work in thinking that you do is around societal structures and the things that shape how we do what we do in the world that we're doing it in. And you and I have had a bit of a conversation around this intersection of the components of the future of work, the future of education, the future of information. And I would posit that all of this drives and will drive the future of our business and the future of the talent that we're hiring and what our strategies look like. So as we're coming to the bottom of the hour here, what should be top of mind for folks in this opportunity as we're questioning the assumptions that we had? And I don't think we're going back to the box that we were living in before. So what can people be thinking about and looking at?
Wow, well, I think there's a bunch of things. I'm going to stray away from education a little though and talk about something that has become very mainstream, which is universal basic income. Mm-hmm. Universal basic income. A lot of people in the U.S. were exposed to this idea recently through the presidential candidate Andrew Yang. He talked about, that was the whole basic platform, giving everyone $1,000 a month or something. But I think that, this experience, the whole, the pandemic, its health effects, the financial effects, the destabilizing effects in general. I think that it's a really good case for implementing what's called universal basic income, or just basic income, where governments can just literally give unconditional cash payments to individuals on a regular basis to avoid poverty and social suffering, basically. I mean, it's been proven to work in many, many cases. I understand Canada is currently unrolling this like $2,000 a month UBI for all of their citizens, like effective immediately until the crisis is over, is what they've said. So I think that sort of open-ended help, social safety net type thing is desperately needed in America. So this, to me, this is the time to start questioning the assumption that just because you give someone money for nothing, let's say, you know, you don't force them to work or whatever, that people will be inherently wasteful or selfish or lazy or whatever the fears are. I think it's time to look at those assumptions. I think it's time to look at the assumption that everyone needs to pull themselves up somehow, that everyone has this equal footing in America, that we all have the same opportunities. It's been unequal for quite a while. So I think that leveling that without question, you know, just sort of acknowledging that everyone has a basic worth and something to contribute, and finding a way to support that by challenging those assumptions about different people's ability to contribute under different circumstances.
Yeah, moments of stress, of great disruption, shine big lights on the cracks and the positive components that were in any given society, in any given situation. Stress highlights both the positive and the negative. And so now we are seeing front and center around the world the strength or weakness of the structures that had been there before. And again, what I'm hearing as the underlying theme of what you're sharing with us is questioning assumptions. Look at what we're thinking about, and more importantly, asking, why have we been thinking about it that way? And then the follow-up, was it good that we were thinking about it that way?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and how do we want it to be? Most importantly, I mean, as a futurist, that's our main thing, is, you know, how do we want things to be, and how do we get them to that point? So let's take this opportunity to think about what we want, what society we want to create, and do it.
What kind of a society we want to create? I think that is really inside of this moment of great disruption. One of the things that I say is that disruption is simply opportunity that looks different than what we were used to. And so this is yet one more of the opportunities that's available to us thanks to the massive disruption that we are experiencing. What can we create out of this? Alex, we are coming to the bottom of the hour. What words would you like to leave with our audience here as we're wrapping up?
I guess, you know, my words are, you know, embrace your flexibility, adaptability, creativity, and you're doing a great job.
Yeah. Yes, that we are here and connected and together, I feel like is a great victory for all of us.
Definitely.
Alex, I can't thank you enough for investing part of your Sunday here with us and bringing your insight and ideas to our conversation here. So thank you so much for that.
Enjoyed it. Thank you so much.